Listen closely, because if you miss the first breath of this story, you'll miss the moment the world you thought you lived in begins to collapse. Picture this. A little girl's fist pounding on a locked barn door, her voice cracking as she screams, "Master killed my mama in the barn." No one ever wrote those words in any ledger. No preacher repeated them. No court recorded them. But someone with far more power than any judge made sure they were buried. And yet here you are, hearing them. Now let me tell you the part no historian will ever admit. Violence is never just violence. It is a message, a signal, a demonstration of control so absolute it doesn't need to be spoken. And Magnolia Ridge Plantation, the place where this nightmare began, was built on that kind of control. On the surface, it was perfect. White columns, trimmed hedges, a family name polished to a shine. But beneath it, beneath the paint, the walls were rotting. They always were. The story begins in Charleston County, 1847, when demolition workers found a letter sealed behind a plaster wall. 2 handwritings, 2 truths, 1 adult, 1 child. The adult wrote like a man terrified of the consequences. The child wrote like someone who no longer feared anything. Because once you see the truth, fear loses its grip. Her name was Ruby, 8 years old, a girl who had already learned to watch silently, because silence was the only weapon she was allowed to have. But that night, she broke her silence, because her mother, Patience, a woman known for a voice that could carry across an entire field, suddenly went quiet. Too quiet. Quiet in a way that only happens when someone makes it happen. Remember this, silence is an engineered tool. And on August 14, 1834, someone engineered it in the barn behind Magnolia Ridge. Ruby wasn't supposed to be awake. She wasn't supposed to wander. She wasn't supposed to see what she saw. But destiny doesn't follow rules. And neither do the truths powerful men spend their lives burying. The letter describes her small hand trembling as she wrote the final line, the Charleston Historical Society tried to suppress for 7 decades. He said nobody would hear her, but I heard everything. What she meant, what she actually saw. That's where the descent begins. Magnolia Ridge was not just a plantation. It was a machine, a mechanism designed to extract obedience, loyalty, and, above all, silence. Every log, every rafter in that barn, every ledger Samuel Rutledge kept. They were all cogs in a system built to enforce a hierarchy that could crush life itself without ever leaving evidence. And that night, Ruby became an unwilling witness to the engine's most hidden gears. Patience, her mother, had always known the rules. She understood that every smile she gave, every nod she offered, every song she sang in the fields carried weight beyond the obvious. She had lived under a law that didn't exist on paper, enforced by the invisible eyes of men who measured souls like cattle. But something broke that night, and whatever broke it, shattered more than one life. The barn was silent at first, save for the scraping of boots on wooden planks. Then, a sound that no ledger could record, the metallic thud of someone falling. Ruby's young mind raced. This was not an accident. There was deliberation in the way her mother was silenced. It was the kind of deliberate cruelty designed to send a message. See, speak, and you will be erased. She pressed herself against the shadows, heart hammering, watching a scene so grotesque it would haunt her every dream for decades. But notice this: what terrified Ruby was not just the act itself. It was the system behind it, the precise, cold orchestration of fear. The way her father, the overseer, and even the absent patriarch of the household had all played their parts without ever stepping into the room. You see, the true horror lies not in violence alone, but in the invisible chains of control, threaded through habit, fear, and social expectation, so that nobody outside the walls would ever understand what happened or why. And that is the lesson they never wanted you to learn. Power is invisible. Control is silent. The strongest chains are not made of iron, they are made of obedience, conditioned fear, and the carefully cultivated illusion of normalcy. Ruby watched as the world she knew warped into something unrecognizable. And somewhere inside her, something changed. She realized that no matter how small, a witness has the power to expose these systems. but exposing it would cost her everything. This is where most men stop seeing, where most histories end. But we are not here to end. We are here to descend. Halfway through the story, I want you to do something. I want you to write, "I see the unseen" twice in the comments. This is not a ritual. It is a lock-in, a marker of identity, a choice to acknowledge that you will look deeper, past the lies, past the comfort of ignorance, into the machinery of power itself. Because once you see it, it changes you forever. Ruby's small eyes didn't just witness violence. They cataloged it. Children absorb patterns adults pretend don't exist. She saw more than a murder that night. She saw the architecture of cruelty. The barn was a stage, the actors invisible yet omnipresent, and the audience was the world outside, ignorant and complicit. Every splinter of wood, every shadow cast by the lantern, became a note in a silent symphony of control. Understand this: plantations were never about agriculture alone. They were laboratories of power, systems designed to break bodies and bend minds. Samuel Rutledge was meticulous. He maintained ledgers and calendars like a scientist, measuring efficiency, compliance, even moods. When a worker faltered, when a voice dared to rise, it was documented. Punishments were calibrated. Fear was engineered. Ruby's mother hadn't died from chaos. She had been removed according to a protocol that ensured the machinery never slowed. But children, particularly the ones raised inside these invisible systems, see patterns adults will deny. Ruby noticed the eyes that never met hers directly, the hands that seemed idle yet controlled everything, the doors that always led to confinement. She realized that power is less about force than anticipation, about predicting every move and embedding consequences into the very fabric of life. She recognized the language of manipulation before she understood words. And then she saw the ledger. Not the official one Samuel kept in his study, polished and orderly. No, this was hidden. A secondary ledger tucked under hay in the loft, written in a mix of adult scrawl and childish loops. It was a confession and an accusation rolled into one, a record of transgressions that the law would never touch, crimes that the world preferred forgotten. Every name, every date, every punishment meticulously logged, like a map for those who wanted to maintain control indefinitely. Ruby understood something in that moment that most men will never comprehend. The most absolute domination is invisible. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It hides behind civility, religion, tradition. It teaches children to obey, to measure themselves against fear, to internalize authority so deeply that even rebellion becomes a silent act of imagination. This is the core of forbidden knowledge. The truth is always buried in plain sight, concealed not by walls but by consent, by indifference, by the careful cultivation of social order. And those who see it too early, they are marked. Ruby was marked, and so are you now, simply by listening. Because the descent continues, and what comes next is not just what she saw in the barn. It is the secret systems designed to ensure no one ever speaks of it. By the time Ruby reached the loft, the world she had known was already gone. The barn smelled of hay, horses, and something darker, something that could never be washed away. Her mother's absence was no longer just grief. It was a lesson in absolute control, in the way a single act of violence could ripple through lives and silence entire communities. Magnolia Ridge was more than a plantation. It was a theater of fear, designed to train obedience as thoroughly as it cultivated tobacco. The overseer, Dutch Calloway, didn't need to speak loudly. His presence, his ledger, his hidden bottle of whiskey each was a carefully placed instrument of control. He monitored not only bodies but minds. Every glance, every command, every unrecorded punishment was a thread in the web, invisible to the outside world, but inescapable to those inside. Ruby realized something chilling. These systems didn't rely on cruelty alone. They relied on secrecy. Knowledge was the weapon, and only the powerful wielded it. She learned that a single observation, if recorded, could dismantle reputations, destroy families, or ignite fear in hearts too small to resist it. The plantation's official ledger was a lie. The hidden ledger was truth, and the truth was more dangerous than any lash. Her mother's death was catalogued there, but not as an accident or indiscretion. It was an experiment, a demonstration of how to erase a life while keeping the machinery running smoothly. The handwriting of the adult chronicler was meticulous, almost clinical, detailing times, sequences, and reactions. The child's hand, Ruby's hand, trembled across the page, yet chronicled every nuance she had absorbed. The way the overseer hesitated, the silent glance between Samuel Rutledge and his sister Margaret, the unspoken rules of survival. Here is what most never understand. The worst kind of power is invisible, systemic, and self-perpetuating. It does not need to strike directly. It manipulates perceptions, rewrites memory, and trains the next generation to continue the cycle. Ruby, at 8, already knew she was witnessing a code that would govern lives long after her mother's voice was silenced. And now, you, the one listening, stand at the threshold. You can close your eyes, step back, return to comfort. Or you can continue. Because the next chapter isn't about what was done to one woman or one girl. It is about how entire systems of manipulation and control were engineered to operate in plain sight, to remain invisible until someone like you chooses to see. Every moment you linger on this story, you are learning the mechanics of hidden authority, the architecture of fear, and the forbidden knowledge that those in power have spent centuries concealing. And once you see it, there is no forgetting. Samuel Rutledge liked to believe he ruled Magnolia Ridge with a steady hand. Men like him always do. They imagine order springs from their discipline, their logic, their so-called reasonable authority. But that authority was never built on reason. It was built on shadows, the kind of shadows that whisper in locked barns and bleed through floorboards. What Ruby discovered after her mother's death was not simply guilt, but infrastructure, a hierarchy of silence, an institution built to protect the man at the top, even from his own sins. Samuel had designed a world where everyone performed a role. The overseer who enforced pain so Samuel's hands stayed clean, the house servants who carried messages but never truths, his widowed sister who maintained the household facade so no rumor could reach Charleston society. They were gears in a machine, some willing, some trapped, all accountable to the quiet tyranny of a single name, Rutledge. But Ruby had something the machine could not predict: perspective. The eyes of someone who saw everything from below. Children raised in the margins develop a perception sharper than those who rule. They notice contradictions. They feel energy shifts. They understand when fear enters a room even before an adult does. And Ruby knew the moment Samuel stepped into the barn afterward that he was not shocked. He was calculating. He wasn't grieving the loss of a woman under his authority. He was strategizing how to erase the evidence. He studied the floor, the tools, the door latch, not with sorrow, but with a mind conditioned to maintain order at any cost. Even his breath was steady. He moved like a man who had rehearsed this, and maybe he had. Systems like Magnolia Ridge didn't rely on accidents. They relied on consistency, predictability, control. Ruby realized something then, something dangerous. Secrets do not stay buried by silence alone. They stay buried through coordination, through the collective agreement of those who benefit from the lie. And in the South of 1834, that agreement was a living, breathing force. It lived in every polite smile at church, every nod between planters, every unspoken rule that protected men like Samuel and erased women like Patience. But here's the truth they never wanted anyone, especially a child, to understand. When you see the hidden structure, you become a threat to it. And Ruby had seen everything. What she did next, what she chose to record in her trembling hand, would crack the foundation of Magnolia Ridge. Ruby's small fingers traced the lines she could barely form, but her mind cataloged every detail with precision no adult could match. She wrote not just to remember, but to preserve truth in a world designed to erase it. Every observation, every subtle motion of the overseer, every calculated glance from Samuel or Margaret became evidence of something far larger than a single crime. This was no longer about her mother, it was about the architecture of domination itself. The plantation operated like a silent army, each person a soldier unknowingly complicit. The field hands obeyed out of necessity, the house servants obeyed out of training, The children obeyed out of fear, but the machinery that bound them together was unseen, untouchable, and self-reinforcing. Power, Ruby learned in that loft, doesn't need to be spoken. It needs to be structured. Rules, rituals, habits, and fear all woven into a fabric so dense that anyone born into it accepts it as reality. And yet, what fascinated Ruby most was the improvisation hidden inside the system. Samuel Rutledge was careful, but even the most meticulous tyrant leaves cracks. A whispered word, a glance too long, a hesitation in routine, these were vulnerabilities, and Ruby, even as a child, saw them. She understood that systems like Magnolia Ridge could only function because every observer was taught to look away. She realized that silence is as much a tool of control as the lash, the ledger, or the locked barn door. Silence and complicity were the real instruments of domination. That night, Ruby made a choice. She would not be silenced. She could not undo what happened to her mother, but she could ensure it could never be entirely hidden. That ledger, hidden among the hay, would hold the truth. And one day, someone would read it. Someone would understand what had been carefully obscured for decades. This is the lesson no history book will ever teach. The systems that dominate lives, the invisible hierarchies that enforce obedience, the institutionalized cruelty, they survive because they are invisible, because the world believes in the illusion of normalcy. Ruby's insight was dangerous. Dangerous not because she was a child, but because she understood the machinery that adults spent their lives perfecting. And dangerous for anyone who stumbles upon the same insight today, because once you see the invisible chains, you cannot unsee them. Once you recognize the architecture of control, your life and your perception of the world changes forever. And now, you are in that same place Ruby occupied in the loft. You see the machine. You understand the system. And there is no turning back. By the time Ruby's confession reached the ledger, she had already become a ghost in her own life. Not in the literal sense, but in the sense that those who see too much are often unseen. Samuel Rutledge, for all his meticulous control, could not fully anticipate the mind of a child trained in observation and survival. And that is the danger of forbidden knowledge. It doesn't announce itself. It waits for the one who can read between the lines, who can detect the hidden rules beneath the apparent order. Magnolia Ridge was more than a house, a field, or a barn. It was a web of psychological control, an institution that taught compliance without instruction, that built obedience into every routine, every glance, every act of daily labor. Patience's death was the ultimate demonstration of that control, but it was also an anomaly. It was the one variable the system could not fully contain. And the child who witnessed it became the system's unintentional saboteur. Observe carefully. Power like this is rarely violent in the conventional sense. Its violence is subtle, methodical, and systemic. It exists in the ledger, the hierarchy, the unspoken rules, the expectation of compliance. Every decision Samuel made, every oversight of Dutch Calloway, every silent nod from Margaret reinforced the illusion of order. Yet Ruby's eyes cut through it. She saw the pattern. She saw the way authority and fear intertwined. She understood that a single act of truth could unravel decades of structured deception. And this is where forbidden knowledge becomes dangerous for the observer. Ruby had glimpsed the mechanics of power, the way entire hierarchies are built on fear, secrecy, and coordination. She had seen how a single individual can orchestrate obedience without laying a hand on anyone, how punishment is more effective when it is anticipated rather than delivered, and how silence can become a prison heavier than iron bars. Her decision to document what she saw was more than defiance, it was survival. It was a rebellion coded in ink and observation. And now, you, listening to this, are at a similar threshold. The truths you absorb here will linger. They will shape your perception of authority, control, and the invisible chains that govern human behavior. You cannot unknow this. You cannot walk away unchanged. Every hierarchy you encounter, every institution you enter, carries the same principles Ruby observed: invisible enforcement, anticipatory control, and meticulously maintained silence. And just like her, you must decide. Do you accept it, or do you learn to see the patterns, to read the hidden ledger, to understand the machinery that others rely upon to maintain power? Ruby's ledger survived decades because the world was trained not to notice it. The walls concealed it, the floorboards hid it, and the people who might have read it were either too complicit, too afraid, or too blind. But the ledger is more than paper, it is a blueprint of the invisible. Every line, every observation, every tremor in a child's hand encodes a reality most men never see: the architecture of domination. By the time she grew older, Ruby understood that what she witnessed in the barn was a microcosm of a much larger system. Magnolia Ridge was not an anomaly, it was a template. A system that could be replicated, refined, and hidden in plain sight across centuries. The patterns she recorded reveal the core principle of all enduring power: control without exposure, obedience without consent, fear without overt violence. A man like Samuel Rutledge did not need to strike constantly. He needed to teach others to anticipate the strike, to internalize it, and to maintain it themselves. Now listen carefully. Institutions, hierarchies, governments, families, corporations, they all operate by the same code. The true lesson of Magnolia Ridge is that tyranny is most effective when invisible, subtle, and normalized. The barn, the ledger, the hidden glances, they were all part of a system that could have functioned indefinitely if not for a child who refused to forget. Ruby's choice to observe, to record, to survive, reveals what few ever understand. Power is a living thing, and those who perceive it are both its threat and its witness. And here is the final truth no one wants spoken aloud. Once you see these systems, once you understand the way fear is engineered and obedience codified, you cannot return to ignorance. Your perception of every hierarchy, every institution, every human interaction is forever altered. You carry the ledger in your mind. You are now the observer, the witness, the one who knows the machinery behind the curtains. This knowledge is dangerous. It is corrosive to comfort. It awakens awareness where there was compliance. And it transforms men who were passive into men who see patterns, who understand control, and who know how the invisible structures of power bend the world around them. Ruby survived. The system she exposed continued, but it no longer had total dominion. And now, so do you. Because the barn is empty, the ledger is open, and the truths long buried are in your hands. Comment: I see the unseen twice if you're ready to witness what the powerful tried to erase. Share this with someone brave enough to see the hidden structures of control in history and in life itself. Subscribe now because some truths were never meant to be told. Until today.